NewsX World, pleasure to have you on as always. We now move over to Europe, where a Ukrainian drone strike triggered a fire and forced a reduction in output at Russia's Kursk nuclear power plant. The plant's press service said an auxiliary transformer was damaged, cutting capacity at one of the reaction units by half. Russian air defences intercepted the drone near the facility, but the detonation sparked the fire, which has now been extinguished. Officials reported no casualties and said radiation levels remain within normal limits. Meanwhile, on Saturday, Moscow announced that its troops had captured two villages, Serdny and Klebanitsk, in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. The advances bring Russian forces closer to Konstantin, a heavily fortified town and a logistical hub on the road to Kramatorsk. Following this, Ukraine says its troops are holding the line and even recaptured a village elsewhere in Donetsk, highlighting the heavy back-and-forth fighting. These parallel developments, a drone strike inside Russia and Russian gains on the front, underscore the war's escalating intensity in its fourth year, even as diplomatic efforts to broker a summit between Putin and Zelensky appear to stall. Okay, we are obviously covering the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Slight Russian gains we hear about in the eastern front of Ukraine, where most of the fighting is continuing. Moscow has announced that it has captured two new villages, Sredny and Klebanitsk. These are in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region, which has been a hot spot for conflict and a region and an area of Ukraine that Russia wants to obtain. Obviously, Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine sees that as part of its sovereignty. And as these peace negotiations and diplomatic efforts continue, it will be very interesting to see how territory is negotiated, especially as Russia continues to advance on Ukrainian soil. There's also been a drone strike which has triggered a fire on a Russian nuclear power plant, which has started a fire on an auxiliary transformer which has been damaged, which has cut the capacity by half at one of the reactor units. And this is obviously has the backdrop of ongoing diplomacy as efforts continue with Donald Trump trying to broker a peace deal between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Okay, we are joined now by Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us from Taipei, Taiwan. Ross, thank you as always for joining us here on the program. Ross, we have news of further advancements of Russian forces into Ukrainian territory. Two more villages being captured in the eastern Donetsk region. Military capabilities by Moscow seem to be advancing Ukraine's. How are these going to affect diplomatic talks going forward? And going into talks, how are both sides feasing in their military positions?
Although the gains made by Russia's military on the ground in eastern Ukraine are very incremental, but in response to your, in response to your question, it might very well harden President Trump's position from the perspective that President Trump is going to put pressure on Ukraine and President Zelensky to accept some kind of ceasefire arrangement that requires acknowledgement that the Russian military is going to continue to occupy part of Ukrainian territory. Certainly, it looks unrealistic to expect Russia to withdraw. So again, President Trump is going to look at these kinds of gains, and specifically when it involves actual villages or towns, something that President Trump could point to rather than just open ground. For example, President Trump is going to say to Zelensky that you're losing towns, you're losing villages. You have no choice but to reach a ceasefire agreement based on what territory Russia continues to occupy. And then from Russia's perspective, that just gives them even more incentive during this period when the United States is putting pressure on both sides to reach an agreement. It really gives Russia an incentive to continue its attempts to move forward, however incremental those gains might be.
Ross, thank you very much for that insight. We're also joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky. He is a Professor and Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us here on the programme. We just ran through a couple of military updates that have occurred. Moscow has announced that it has captured 2 new villages in the Donetsk region. If you could go over the importance, the territorial importance of this region, and also the fight, the long fight over the Donetsk and its territorial importance for us.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't worry too much about 2 villages being captured by the Russian army. You know, they like to report to Putin good news every day when he wakes up. And if they lose those 2 settlements tomorrow, they will not report that. I will take the longer perspective. How much territory has the Russian army captured over the last 12 months? And it's nothing significant. It's 3,000 square kilometers, but the battlefield line is 1,000 kilometers. So effectively, Russia advanced 3 kilometers for 1 year, which is nothing. Well, somewhere they may advance 10 kilometers, somewhere they lost a couple of kilometers, but that's the kind of indication that we really have a stalemate with very small advances somewhere, often. And, you know, last week they also reported Dobropilia, a kind of a bigger village, and they lost it after that. So really nothing significant in terms of Russian advances. And I kind of don't share the opinion of a previous speaker. It doesn't change much also in terms of Donald Trump's strategy. In fact, I see everything in Alaska that has been discussed is no longer there. There is no longer discussion about territorial swaps. It was not, by the way, Ukraine that doesn't want ceasefire. Repeatedly over the last 6 months, Vladimir Zelensky was the one who wanted to have a ceasefire, even limited to 30 days. It was Vladimir Putin who denied every attempt for a ceasefire, continued attacks on civilian targets over those 6 months, and also rejected a high-level meeting with Zelensky. So the non-cooperative party in all of those 6 months has been the Russian Federation, not the Ukrainians. Ukrainians accepted the Donald Trump proposal for temporary ceasefire many times. They accepted the high-level meeting with Putin many times, and it is only the Russian Federation reluctance to see any progress here that actually leave us back where we are always.
Professor Popovsky, do stay with us as we discuss further updates